Assalamu alaikum, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Thank you, Dr. Abu Bakr, and thank you for IIT for inviting me to be here. The topic of Islamic reform and reform of education has occupied many minds over many decades. I'm not sure if I'll be able to add anything significant, but perhaps some provocations. So when we talk about the question of reform of education, we think about a very significant event that happened in 1977, the Makkah conference, where a number of people got together, scholars, Muslim intellectuals, and thought about the challenges that Muslims face in questions of education. But what is the background to that conference in itself? In my mind, it is at two levels. At one level, I think there was general dissatisfaction with the way in which Muslim religious ideas were produced, that the production of religious thought itself has been stagnant, and there's been more than 2 centuries of complaints about the lack of ijtihad, the lack of thinking, the lack of creativity in Muslim thought. So that is the backdrop to that. On the other hand, is this anxiety and the fear that secular education is penetrating all Muslim societies and Muslims are losing their identity. So the backdrop was the question of how to preserve identity and the question of identity formation, and the other one was dissatisfaction and how to upgrade the knowledge tradition of Muslims when it relates to questions of religious thought. On the first issue, this question of religious thought, already in round about 1914, there'd be other debates in other parts of the world too, but a man called Muhammad Shibli Nu'mani was a very important scholar in India, wrote an essay called Education Old and New, comparing madrasa education with modern education. And Shibli Nu'mani basically asked the question, is modern education and Islamic education, are these mutually contradictory educational systems? And his questions might sound redundant today, but almost a century later, what are we in 2014? Yes, exactly a century later, this question of madrasa education remains a hinge question. Madrasas in South Asia, religious institutions in different parts of the Muslim world are still trying and battling with this idea that how do Muslims upgrade their skills in Islamic learning. Shibli Nu'mani basically argued that it must be a hybrid, it must be a synthesis between the two. And he used a very interesting Urdu phrase that it must be a ma'joon murakkab. It must be a complex panacea, the solution. Responding to Shibli was a man called Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi. Thanvi is a very important luminary in the Deobandi sphere in India and very important figure. His influence carries still today. He basically responded and said, having two systems come together is not a good thing. It will be a ma'joon murakkab. For him, a hybrid is a bad thing. For the other one, a hybrid was a good thing. And so this debate continues, and I think we have been treading water for more than a century. The question is, on the question of Muslim identity, a lot of anxiety has gone into that. People want to find out what is an Islamic paradigm? What is Islamic about Islamic education? And my response to this, after thinking about this issue a great deal, is the question that it is about the ethical. Islamic education, what we would talk about, is about the ethical. How does one kickstart within young people, within people who are going to be disseminators of knowledge of the tradition of the faith, how does one inculcate ethicality within them, and how does knowledge perform ethically in the world? Unfortunately, in my view, the whole idea of Muslim identity has become a trap for censorship. What is good knowledge, what is bad knowledge? And every time we approach a problem, we get anxiety. It's precisely the opposite. Ethicality means in my view, that you are open to all the knowledge of the time. All the knowledge is your treasure. This filtering of knowledge, this question of censorship and anxiety impedes excellence. And so one of the key features of an Islamic orientation to ethicality is ihsan, the search for excellence, the search for virtues. Excellence is the key issue, and excellence means one has to read everything. One has to understand everything, and not come up and say, what is the paradigm? The paradigm in itself is an indicator of psychological concern. That you are not prepared to venture and be bold and to experiment. The paradigm question has become so overwhelming that experimentation, the idea of testing out, the possibility of testing out ideas, that has become an impediment. So we spend a lot of time on methodology. What is the method? What is the method? What is the method? What is the paradigm? What is the paradigm? And we do not get to do the work. The work is get down and mess your hands, dirty your hands, go knee deep into the production and the search and quest for learning, and then see what comes out of that. Most people think that the question of this ethicality is that you must have some kind of aqidah radar, some kind of doctrinal radar. Most Muslims have their doctrines worked out. So sometimes these doctrines, they are subtle infringements, sometimes they are serious infringements, but first you need to infringe before you can understand what's going on. But if you're going to keep those barriers and say, create these large walls, new knowledge can even enlighten and develop and enhance the doctrinal components and make it more deeper and make it more meaningful through exchange, through a clash, through a dialectic. And hence, in my view, the question of Islamic education and Islamic reform, the big problem has been we have not been doing the work which we need to do. And that is that we have to spend more time in experimentation, in creativity, in innovation. Those are the keywords. Innovation, creativity. Not about concerns about, it's only when you're going to be creative and innovate that we will know what our mistakes are. But until that, and we have to make one mistake after the other, and multiple mistakes, before we come to know what is the right thing. So the more mistakes we make, the greater possibility that we'll hit the right thing. But a hyper-cautious attitude in trying to create walls and barriers and paradigms that we don't even know whether those paradigms work, in my view, are deeply problematic. And I think the elephant in the room is Muslim identity. What is Muslim identity? You can't even get two Muslims into a room and ask them to talk about what Muslim identity is they disagree about. Other point is that if you have identity concerns, and excellence in knowledge means that you have to cultivate diversity of perspectives. Diversity of perspectives is the way forward in which multiple mistakes can be made and multiple right answers can be found. So you must have diversity of perspectives. Singularity of perspectives is a problem that the paradigmatic approach and the Muslim identity approach creates. In a world in which we are living, in which there are several contenders for domination, several contenders who want to have an ethical state, we need to have a much more robust attitude as to how we are going to create the possibilities for newness. Let me give you one example. Al-Mawardi, 11th century scholar, who tried to deliberate about ethics. In his book, Kitab Adab al-Dunya wa Deen, in his opening lines he says, in this book, I am going to engage and combine multiple perspectives. أجمع فيه بين ترقيق الفقهاء بين تحقيق الفقهاء وترقيق الأدباء. I am going to combine in this book the perspective of the verities of the jurists and the subtleties or the elegance of the literateurs. You know what? When one engages in a conversation on Muslim ethics and you quote, today you quote a poet, or you quote a literary figure, most people's hackles will go up. But that is, you're quoting Rumi. Rumi is a poet, he's out of his mind. Or you're quoting a literary figure. Oh, Abu Nuwas was a bad guy, he had bad habits, he drank. You cannot quote. The idea that we have about that, there in the 11th century, Mawardi was a creator, he was an innovator, he was a genius. Mawardi brings multiple things together in order to find the ethical. In his very introduction, he quotes numerous poets to not only to istishhad, that is to have a proof text, but also to get insight. In other words, what we today would think that if you engage in a conversation about truth and questions about philosophy or questions about juridical elements and so on, you must have only talk from those sources. That was not how the Islamic past was. There was a greater creativity, greater openness to the humanistic tradition of Islamic thought, and it's only a return and a critical engagement with that humanistic tradition, not treating them as icons, but creating them as a conversation partner to create new things. That's how one will be able to engage in innovation, and that will be the beginning of Islamic reform. It's only when we have innovation in thought that you can say we have reform. Have more of the same, to have more caution is not reform, that is caution. These are two very different words. Thank you very much. Alhamdulillah.